Today, we're diving into the 1997 Asian financial crisis and the famous gold collecting campaign in Korea. People often say it helped save the nation, but did it really?
That's a good starting point. On the surface, it looked like an incredible show of unity. Millions donated gold to pay off debts. But in terms of actual numbers, the impact wasn't as massive as people think.
Right, the funds collected were symbolic more than decisive. The debt crisis wasn't solved by melted wedding rings and necklaces. It was more about the morale boost.
Exactly. International observers saw Koreans coming together, and that restored confidence. But the real structural issues, those weren't solved just by gold.
And that's the uncomfortable truth. The crisis came from deeper patterns: over-reliance on short-term foreign loans, heavy focus on exports, and not enough resilience in domestic systems.
I like that you used the word patterns. The problem wasn't just the dollar shock. It was also lifestyle choices, spending, overseas travel, loose discipline after the Olympics boom.
Almost like a family maxing out credit cards after a party, then blaming a sudden bill for the collapse.
That's a sharp analogy. And here's the key. Instead of redesigning the system, the country just patched the holes with borrowed money.
Which meant the crisis didn't really end. The effects stayed beneath the surface, waiting to resurface.
Yes, and the gold drive, while inspiring, distracted from bigger reforms. For example, using 3D industries, dirty, difficult, dangerous, as a foundation to rebuild international competitiveness.
But no one wanted those jobs. Society had already turned away from that sector.
Exactly, though those industries once lifted the country into heavy manufacturing. If leaders had restructured instead of covering up, Korea could have diversified better. 70% export industries, 30% finance, for instance.
That's an interesting ratio. Finance was another missed opportunity. The crisis was a wake-up call about financial literacy, but instead of learning, people rushed to plug holes.
And here's the irony. While gold was being donated, many households were already holding US dollars at home. If those had been collected, the financial effect could have been far greater.
So in hindsight, the gold collection was more about psychology than economics.
Yes, it gave the world an image of unity, even fueled cultural pride later, but it didn't fundamentally stop the IMF program.
Which raises the question, did Korea really overcome IMF, or just postpone another crisis?
I'd say postpone, because unless you change the system, the same storm can hit again.
It's like feeding a beggar without teaching him to work. He survives today, but the cycle continues tomorrow.
Exactly. And that's the deeper lesson. Crises are opportunities for transformation. If you only cover them up, you waste that chance.
So perhaps the real takeaway is this. The gold drive was a symbol, but real recovery requires redesign, discipline, and long-term vision.
And the next time uncertainty rises, maybe the question isn't, will another IMF come? But, have we changed enough to face it without panic?
That's the kind of reflection worth leaving our listeners with. Not just about Korea, but about any society facing crisis.
Because crises never arrive all at once. They knock softly before they strike hard. The question is whether we answer the first knock.
And that's where we'll wrap up. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into history, unity, and hard lessons.
Until next time, stay thoughtful and stay prepared.